Episode 11 begins in the upstairs room at Lee's apartment. So here comes Lee. He's in his upstairs room and he just got home from school late that afternoon. And you can tell that he has a lot on his mind. And I'm not kidding. And then he gets a flashback, as you remember back in episode 11 in season 2, of how Sakura became the mistress of the cars because Yue had just proclaimed her to after she passed the final judgment. Then back to the present in Lee's apartment as he was training with his sword, using sword fighting skills. And yet he couldn't help but wonder, where did he mess up? How did he mess up so bad since episode 2, episode 10, when he failed the final judgment? And yet he couldn't help but think to himself, why did he even bother training anyway? Then flashback back to season 2, episode 11, when for the first time that Sakura had transformed the cloud staff into a star staff, all on her own, as Cloudry's astral image has told her since then. Then back to the present in Lee's apartment. Now Lee just couldn't help but what's going on in his head, and he just pleaded himself a case to say how unfair it was. Then flashback, we go back to 10 episodes ago when the class ended. That's when Sakura met with Lee in the hallway. And that's when Lee told Sakura the bad news that he just got a call from his mother in Hong Kong where he comes from. And so she wanted to know from him if Lee's mother was ever glad to see that the cloud cards are safe. And he told her, Sakura that is, that they are. And he knows this because he just learned it from his mother. So before heading off, Sakura wants to know what was up with him, and yet he just pleaded his case to say that there was nothing wrong with him. He says that since Sakura's the new mistress of the cars now he felt that he's no longer needed, and there's nothing for him to do. Then finally, Sakura pleaded her case to say none of this would have been possible if it wasn't for his help, and yet she told him that he is indeed needed. So back to the present in Lee's apartment. Now he's all distraught and upset because he just pleaded his case to say that Sakura shouldn't be the mistress of the cars and that he is. And why? Because after all, he is part of the Cloud dynasty and Cloudry's descendant. And now he's left to wonder how he's going to break this news to his mother the next time she calls back. Then flashback, we go back to season 2, episode 10, on how Lee failed the final judgment to begin with. So long story short, after that short-lived battle, that's when Lee was told by Yue to use 7 of the cards that he had previously. So, by surprise, that's exactly what Lee did. He uses the time card to freeze everything in place. Oh, it did all right. Well, except for Yue, of course. And then when Yue uses the power of time against Lee, that causes Lee to lose the final judgment, just as he did previously. So back to the present. Late at night upstairs in Lee's room, he couldn't help but felt guilt-ridden about it and how he let his family down. He said so in his case. So the next morning at Sakura's school is now a quarter after 11. So Sakura, who had just made it to the classroom, says hello to her best friend Madison. I'm glad you've made it on time, Madison said. Next up is Rita. She said good morning to Sakura as well. So Sakura had to ask Rita a question. Since both she and Madison are going to the museum the next day, she wonders if Rita should join up with them. So after Rita thought about it and said, gee, I wish I could, but I got a piano recital that's coming up. So in other words, Rita declined. Madison, who wants to make Sakura feel better, says, I guess it's just you and I. Then Eli's voice says, hey, did I hear someone is going to the museum the next day? And then later Lee shows up. And then Sakura was talking about how she and Madison wanted to check out the exhibits. So Eli agrees to go along with the two girls. So Sakura made a suggestion to have everybody meet at the school and then catch the bus to the museum. Good idea, Eli said. Then Sakura looks at her shoulder to look at Lee and she can tell that he was very depressed. Are you okay? Sakura asked. Of course I'm okay, Lee said. So Sakura made a suggestion with Lee that maybe he should go to the museum with her, Madison, and Eli. At first, Lee doesn't say a word, and then Sakura suggested that it'll be much fun if he goes along with them. So by accident, that's when Sakura had let slip to Lee to say that since Eli's coming along, and we just asked him about it, he agreed. So after Lee had thought about Sakura's suggestion, and then he says, okay, so you know what this means? Everyone's going along. Lee, Sakura, Eli, and Madison. So sometime after class, there's Lee sitting on the fountain when he heard the two girls talking to each other, the two girls being Sakura and Madison. So Sakura wants to know if there was something off with Lee and wondered if there was something weird going on with him. So Lee runs up to overhear the two girls talking to each other. So while overhearing the conversation, that's when Sakura goes first to tell Madison that maybe Lee doesn't like Eli that much and etc. So Madison, who agrees with Sakura in her case, she says, I don't see the reason why Lee should hate Eli and that he seems like a nice guy. Eli, that is. So Sakura told Madison that she suggested that Eli and Lee should get along a little better and etc. Because the reason being is because that's why she's invited Lee to the museum earlier. So Madison agrees with Sakura's suggestion and says, don't worry, Eli and Lee will be friends in no time. Oh, speaking of which, back with Lee, he had no idea that Eli had just approached him from behind. So Eli was asking Lee a question. Did I miss anything? But before Lee can answer Eli's question, he hesitated. But then he stood up and looked at Eli and says, I wasn't spying on Sakura Madison, honest. Then Lee says, you shouldn't be sneaking up on people like that. And so after that, Lee ran off. So after Lee ran off, that's when Eli pleaded himself a case to say, I don't know why, but you just gave me an idea. And then he thought about it. So back with Lee, who had just left from school earlier, and while running off, that's when out of nowhere, just as UA did before, he appeared right in front of him. So just like before, after UA had approached in front of Lee, he said, if I'm not mistaken, now that all the cars have been captured, your cloud destiny is in question. So even though Lee agrees with UA, then pleads his case to say that Sakura is the mistress now. So even though UA agrees with Lee and says that's true, but your role's very important. Now Lee wants to know from UA where can he stand from there and what he's supposed to do about it. After all, as Lee says that in Sakura's case, she's got the cards. Of course, even though UA agrees, and then tells him that the fate is in her hands. So just like before, UA gave Lee one final mission that Sakura needs him more than ever, and his magic as well. So just like that, right in front of Lee, UA became Julian, Sakura's older brother's best friend. So meanwhile in Eli's house, that's when Eli told Spinner that, quote, that everything went according to plan. Then Eli says that in his case, he has no idea that he expected to win Sakura's trust so easily. So Spinner, although he agrees with Eli, he says posing as a student is a brilliant idea. Then Spinner also said, and of course he's not kidding when he said it, he said that winning Sakura's friendship will be used as an advantage. So Spinner wants to know what Eli should do about Lee, and then Eli pleads his case. He said that ever since he arrived, Lee has been poking around in his affairs lately. Then Eli said that in Lee's case, he made it a personal mission to keep an eye out on things, especially on Eli himself. So Spinner asked Eli a question. Why? Is he slowing down your progress or something? Then Spinner made a suggestion. He said that maybe Ruby and I should put a spell on Lee for you. That is, if you want us to, he said. So after Eli had thought about Spinner's suggestion and what he thought of it, But then Eli declined and said that it won't be necessary because, aha, Eli himself has a plan of his own. He said that maybe Lee may be useful to me, Eli said. So meanwhile, late at night at Lee's apartment in his upstairs room, so what Lee did is that he was checking for messages on the cell phone, and it turns out that he has two. One from his mother. First of all, to let Lee know that since the cards are safe since she's lately received a letter from him, and then suggested that maybe it was time for him to go home to Hong Kong where he comes from, and the other from Sakura. So Sakura's message had just let Lee know that since everybody's going to the museum the next day, she suggested that Lee should bring some money along. So Sakura's final message on the phone says, "Don't forget, we're meeting at school at 10 o'clock. Make sure you be there." So Lee has this thought in his mind after hearing Sakura's message that he did agree on one thing, that he and Sakura are indeed a team, and none of the cards would be captured if it wasn't for their teamwork, and he happens to agree himself with that. So flashback, we go back to season 1, episode 19 before Mei Lin came. That's when both Lee and Sakura had made their teamwork effort work by capturing the move card. It was at the time that he, Sakura, and Madison had their trip to the library that day. So after capturing the move card on the bridge, good news for Madison, who was there, she catches the book for Sakura so that she can use it for the book report. But bad news, both Sakura and Lee had gotten all wet because they fell in the water. Then back to the present in Lee's upstairs room, he now realizes what their teamwork has meant so much to both himself and Sakura. Then flashback, we go back to season 1 and episode 21, right after Maylin had arrived. It was at the time that the school's marathon took place. And of course, Maylin had fell and hurt her leg. But that's not all. That's when Lee and Sakura realized that the reason why they were running in the exact same Cherry Tree Street twice is because of the loop card. So they did work together to capture it. So that's what happened. So long story short, right after the loop card was captured, everybody went back to school. Lee, his cousin Maylin right before she left, Sakura, and Madison. Then back to the present in Lee's upstairs room. That's when Lee started having a thought that maybe Yue's right. Maybe I am needed after all. Because as Yue says in his case, Sakura's gonna need him and his magic more than ever. Then flashback, we go back to episode 4 exactly 7 episodes ago. That was before Sakura, Madison, Lee, and Eli went to the craft shop later on. And that's when Lee has been spotted by Eli when Eli saw him up in a tree. That's when Eli pleads his case with Lee to say, maybe you and I ought to be friends one day. And of course, he's not kidding when he said it. When Lee thought about it and said, well, if you say so. It was at that time that Lee has a reason not to trust Eli, and especially with Sakura. Then back to the present in Lee's upstairs room, that's when Lee has a thought in his mind. That maybe his mother will allow Lee to stay around after all, because as Lee says in his case, Eli shouldn't be trusted, and of course Lee has a reason to. But in Lee's case, he's left to wonder why he hates Eli that much. So the very next morning, just the way it's planned, Sakura, Lee, Madison, and Eli all went to the museum. So meanwhile there, while sitting around having tea with each other, that's when Sakura pleaded her case to say, boy, we've been walking around all day. So Eli agrees with her and said that they were. Well, Madison just got some good news. She's got enough footage in her video camera for all the exhibits she's been, especially the Egyptian exhibit. So after Madison pleads her case to say now that she's finished the project, all she has to do is edit the film, that's when Sakura went, oh my goodness, I never thought about the topic yet, and it's due on Monday, she said. Then Sakura suggested that maybe I should do those weather patterns for the project. So Eli looked at Lee and says, oh, speaking of which, have you sensed anything strange lately? At first, Lee didn't say a word, but then he asked a question. What do you mean? Then Eli says, well, common occurrences or something, he said. But before Lee can answer Eli's question, that's when Madison pleads her case by asking a question. What are you talking about? Lee hasn't sensed a thing, she said. Now Sakura stood up and after she agrees with her best friend Madison, she says, well, if Lee hasn't sensed a thing, then I didn't either, she said. Then Sakura says, I got an idea. Why don't we all see the last exhibit together? She suggested. No thanks, Lee says. I had to get back, he said. So after that, Lee hangs his head and started walking off, but then Sakura says, hey, Lee, wait up. Don't leave, she said, and so she runs to catch up with him. So long story short, after Eli and Madison had no idea what's been going on with Lee, so speaking of which, back with Lee, he makes it to the elevator. And speaking of Sakura back with her, she's still running to catch up with him. Also catching up with Sakura were Madison and Eli. So, back with Sakura after she finally catches up with Lee, who's at the elevator. So Sakura wants to know why you're running off like that. What's going on? Why you're in a hurry? Also catching up with Sakura was Madison and Eli. So back with Sakura and Lee, they got inside the elevator. So when Sakura says, hey you guys, hurry up. So Madison and Eli tried to hurry to get inside the elevator. So back with Madison and Eli, while Madison was walking ahead, all of a sudden, I don't know what Eli's doing, but he started acting really weird and his arm begins to glow. Inside the elevator car with Lee and Sakura, next thing you know, the elevator car started acting really weird. So with the elevator doors closed, bad news for Lee and Sakura, they're now trapped in the elevator. Outside, Madison tries to push the button again for the doors to open, but nothing happened. So Eli, instead of telling Madison what's really going on, he says, maybe the elevator's broken. You wait here. I'll go get help. And so Eli runs off. So back in the elevator car with Lee and Sakura, Lee tries to call for help on the elevator phone, but nothing worked. Then Sakura tries her luck to call for help on her cell phone, but that didn't work either. Now Sakura, who was worried and concerned, she asks, what are we going to do about it? Well, he says, all we can do is just wait for help to arrive, he suggested. Then Lee tries to give Sakura the encouragement the best way he knew how. He says, if I know Madison, she probably ran off to get help somehow, he said. So 7 hours later it is now after 5 o'clock at night. Still in the elevator car were Lee and Sakura. And they waited and they waited and they waited, and they're hoping that Madison would come back to get help. Well, in Sakura and Lee's case, things looked hopeless. I'm sure help is on its way by now, Lee said to Sakura. Well, thanks to Lee's elemental card of fire, at least Sakura can have a compliment with him, and since it could have been worse, at least we're not in the dark waiting, she said. So long story short, after Eli had stood in the hallway with a sun staff in his hand, back with Lee and Sakura, who were still in the elevator car, they thought that the elevator was moving, or so they thought. That's because the elevator's numbers were all weird. If that wasn't weird enough, something caused Sakura to go to the side of the elevator, and there's this strange looking hole. Now, Lee does what any person would do, he runs to try to save her. But then, when he failed to, I don't know what happened, but Lee was very distraught and was screaming her name. But wait, Lee just saw something glowing from below. It's Sakura. But wait, here's something else. What Sakura did, although we didn't see it, but it is confirmed that Sakura had transformed another card, the float card. So good news, thanks to the float star card that she used, she managed to get out and join up with Lee back inside the elevator car. So Sakura told Lee, it's okay. I transformed another card because I remember you showed it to me once, Sakura said. So good news for Lee. He not only sees that Sakura is safe, but he's also glad to see that she's okay. So long story short, now that Eli has put his sun staff away back with Lee and Sakura, also the good news is that now that the dark magic is gone, the elevator is back to normal. So now that the elevator is back to normal, its doors open. And that's when Madison looks at Lee and Sakura and says, "Oh, thank goodness you guys are okay." So Sakura, who agrees with her best friend, she says, "Well, we're glad that we're okay too." They being herself and Lee. So back with Eli, he later shows up to join up with Lee, Sakura, and Madison. So back with Sakura, she said to Madison that she has some better news. She transformed another card. So that makes it 22 star cards on her list. So after Madison was glad to hear the good news from Sakura, but so was Eli, when he agrees with Sakura and said, "Yep, you sure did." So later at Lee's apartment, after Lee had just came back to his upstairs room after that big trip to the museum, then suddenly Lee gets a phone call from his mother. So when Lee went ahead and answered the call, then that's when his mother's voice asked the question, "Did something happen?" Well, Lee told his mother over the phone to say that not only that it did, but he decided that he wanted to stay a while longer. Then Lee's mother's voice says, "I understand that you and Sakura are facing some powerful forces lately." Then Lee's mother gives him the insurance by saying, "Whatever's going on, I'm sure that Sakura needs you and your magic more than you realize." Then Lee's mother's voice said, "I just want you to know that we are all proud of you," she said. Then Lee's mother's voice also says that Sakura may be the new mistress of the cards now, but I just want you to know none of this would be possible if it wasn't for you helping Sakura, Lee's mother said. So Lee wanted to know from his mother, "So let me get this straight. You knew that I failed the final judgment, right?" So Lee's mother told him a shocking surprise. She said that not only that she knew, but she told him that he did what he was supposed to do, which in other words, he is destined to fail so he can continue his mission to help out Sakura. Before the phone call ended, that's when Lee's mother's voice said, "Please promise me one thing. Be very, very careful." And Lee says, "Okay, I will." And then he and his mother ended the phone call. So meanwhile, in the living room of Eli's house, we have Eli sitting in the red chair. Behind him was Ruby, and on the floor was Spinner. So Ruby was first to plead her case to say, "I just can't believe you actually convinced Lee to stay." So Spinner, who agrees with Ruby, pleads his case, and he's not kidding when he said it. He said that Lee will do everything that he can and everything in his power to protect the cards whenever possible. So even though Eli agrees with Spinner, he says, "You two just take care of your duties. Let me handle Lee," he suggested. Then Eli says, "Well, granted, Lee does have magical powers, but just remember, he's still just a kid." And of course, in Eli's case, and he's not kidding when he said it, Sakura's is going to need his help. So we know what this means. Lee has made the right choice to stick around to help Sakura after all. But in Sakura's case, there's still a lot of cards to transform. So that ends episode 11.